pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker, Yisreal from Jerusalem, Israel.
Thank you. I'm an alcoholic, and my name is Yisreal Campbell. Hi, everybody. Just so you know, that's not coming out of my time. We just recently moved back to Israel, so I guess technically I'm a member of the Shalom group, which meets every day in Jerusalem. We meet at 24 Hapalmach. You're all welcome there. We just spent 2 years in New York, where I was a member of the Atlantic group, which many of the members are here today, and I want to thank you all for coming out. I have a sponsor. His name is Clancy. You can save your resentment for Clancy for him. I don't want to hear about it. He doesn't want to hear about it. I'm sure God is open to hearing about it. It is. I've been sober since the 14th of February, 1980. Which makes me about 30 and a half years sober. I got up at 6:30 in the morning, although I do not consider anyone who got up earlier than me, if they did not get sober before the 14th of February 1980, to be sober longer than me. My sobriety is capable of traversing the night. It is continuous in every sense of the word. There's a few things I hear in Alcoholics Anonymous that make me a little nervous, and that's one of them. And the analogy I use is ice. If I have to stand on ice, and the choice is really thin, but highly pure, filtered mineral ice, clear without any impediment, or thick, junky, filled with sticks, muds, and grass, thick ice, but cloudy and messy. Give me thick ice every day of the week. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous has given me, thick ice. My sobriety is messy, it has sticks in it, it has mud in it, it has leaves in it, and you know what? It's sober. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 16 years old. I was in the middle of my junior year in high school. I was a student at Archbishop John Carroll High School for Boys, which may shock some of you, but it wasn't anti-Semitism that put me there. There should be like that voice, that golf voice. For those of you listening to the CD, the speaker has a long black coat, a beard, and curls on the side of his head. He distinctly looks like an Orthodox Jew, though he has just said he went to a Catholic high school. Because I was born an Irish-Italian Catholic kid from Philadelphia. And now I'm an Orthodox Jew living in Jerusalem. Because I worked the steps. I can't promise you that this will happen to you, but it's a possibility. I'm very nervous this morning for a couple of reasons. I haven't spoken for an hour in almost 10 years. I'm afraid that I won't have anything to say. I'm even more afraid that I'll give you a 10-year-old talk. You know, so I want to try and just be here with you this morning, not resent the 22 to 3,000 people that aren't here, not judge their programs, not think that they were what? They don't want to take their medicine. That's entirely up to them. I was this kid, right? I was born and I was just afraid. I was afraid. I was just terrified. My mother is manic depressive. She suffers from depression. She's presently hospitalized due to depression. She's had that affliction. You know, we say we're depressed a lot, and most of us aren't. We're really not. This is something, well, you know, in the same way that someone that drinks, you know, socially but gets drunk once and like stubs their toe and they're like, wow, I was wasted. No, you weren't. Try losing a foot. And I just want to explain the situation as it was. I'm not casting any blame, believe me. I harbor no. My mother was the woman she was. I am grateful to be here. She did the best she could. Bob, Bobby used to say, my parents were incapable of taking care of a dog, but then they never had a dog. But that's really not where I'm coming from. I love my mother. I saw her at the beginning of this trip. Perhaps I'll hopefully make it down to see her tomorrow. But, you know, she suffers from depression, and she's filled with fear. She was almost a nun. She was in the convent. Thank God she left. Otherwise, only half of me would be standing here today. But she left the convent. She was angry at the church. I believe she was a person with deep spiritual needs that were unmet, and she was left with anger, resentment, and fear. And I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know if you can transmit fear through breast milk. But I think you might be able to. Because I was afraid before I ever knew what the word meant. I grew up in suburban Philadelphia. There was no reason for me to be afraid. And I was filled with fear. When I got older and I started reading Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi, men that survived the Holocaust, the Shoah, that lived through Auschwitz, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's the fear. That's the absolute terror that filled me. And when I was 9 years old, I picked up a drink, and it just drained out of me. It was like a guided meditation. It was like that voice that says, you know, breathe in the golden light. That was beer. And it just pushed out the fear and the anxiety. And I drank that night. I got drunk. It was the only time in my life I ever got drunk not knowing why I was getting drunk. I didn't know what it would do for you. From then on, every time I drank alcoholically. The other thing that makes me crazy in Alcoholics Anonymous is this real alcoholic. Are you a real alcoholic? I don't know if I'm a real alcoholic, but that's the kind of thing I could use to leave. We're not trying to make it as hard as possible to stay. We're trying to make it as easy as possible to stay. Because most of us aren't going to stay. I don't know, are you a real alcoholic? Are you real? Are you real? Are you really an American? Really a Jew? I mean, really. Really. You really a lawyer? You're a real lawyer? Because I need a real lawyer. I don't know. But the book tells me that the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is that they will one day be able to control and enjoy their drinking. And I was incapable of that. I could control it, or I could enjoy it. But I couldn't do both. And I rest my alcoholism on that. And whether that makes me a real alcoholic or not, I don't know. But thank God, that's what the book tells me. So I'm supposed to disclose in a general way what it was like, what happened, and what we're like now. That's the what of what I'm doing. That's what we always say. But the book also tells us something different. At the end of the chapter, there is a solution. It says that each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. These give a fair cross-section of our membership and a clear-cut idea of what actually happened in their lives. We hope that no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women desperately in need will see these pages, and we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing. That's what happened. You know, when they wrote this book, there's a young woman here, Katie. She's just a couple of weeks sober. And she's surrounded by hundreds of sober alcoholics. And there were the 7 people that stood on this stage with one day, which means they were drinking when the convention started. And why they were doing that, I don't know. But they were here. 7 people were here last night. This room was packed, right? To every seat was taken. And there were hundreds of other people in another room waiting to get in here. And these 7 people stood here surrounded by Alcoholics Anonymous. But that's not how it began. We sent this book. You sent us a letter. I'm an alcoholic. I live in Boise. And we sent you the book. End of discussion. You now have Alcoholics Anonymous. You have the program as laid out in the first chapters through working with others. And then you have the personal stories as points of identification. You have Bill's story. You have Bob's story. You know, and that's what you got. And there was a money-back guarantee. Is that not beautiful? You could mail the book back and say, all in all, I'd rather drink. Can I have my $2.95 back? Because it's for fun and for free. And it always has been. And yet, how many people will walk away from it? I'm amazed, the Atlantic group. When I first went there, that's 60th and Park, they told me, it's in the church. People, when they say it's in the church, they mean it's in the church. I walk in, I'm starting for the basement. They're like, no, it's in there. The main sanctuary. Filled with people. And outside the main doors, on the curb, 10 guys, drunk, living in boxes. Now, they're living in boxes on Park Avenue, but they're still living in boxes. But they're how far away from recovery from alcoholism are they? Say they're not all alcoholic. Just for the sake of discussion, let's say half of them are alcoholic. 5 guys are sleeping in a box, 15 feet from recovery. 15 feet from freedom, 15 feet from beyond their wildest dreams, and they're not going to take it. They're not going to come inside. They never do. Every week they stay out on the curb, wait for us to shut the doors so they can go back to sleep in their box. That's alcoholism. And even us, we live in this time. We live in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Meetings everywhere. Well, let's go to another meeting. Leave this meeting, you can find a meeting in 3 blocks within an hour, I'm sure. Just don't leave now. But in the span of human history, we live in the tiny, tiny, tiny spot where people recovered from alcoholism. And outside of that tiny, tiny little spot, that little time, those 70 years, 75 years? Thank you. My math is horrible. Outside of those 75 years, people died of alcoholism because there was no other option. I don't know if it's true or not, but let's just go back to the story of Noah. Right? Noah. Built a boat, gathered all the animals, gathered his family, saved the world. 40 days of flood. Whether it's true or not doesn't really matter. Do you know what he did when he got off the boat? Got drunk and naked in front of his kids. Is that not alcoholism? He saved the entire world, and the first thing he did is got drunk and naked in front of the kids. So just say, in the last 4,000 years, 75 of those have had this brief period where people recovered from alcoholism. And we happen to live in it. And we happen to be blessed to be sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. That gives us a tremendous responsibility. Tremendous responsibility. And because when I was 16, I drank for 7 years, start to finish. Picked up my first drink when I was 9. Picked up my last drink when I was 16. Had I known I was going to end up sober, I would have done more. Really, I would have punched a cop. I would have robbed a bank. Those are the two things I regret not doing, because for a long time in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's what mattered to me, the story before I got here. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I identify as an alcoholic because this is Alcoholics Anonymous. I must tell you, I'm a drug addict. I do not take drugs that affect me from the neck up, with the exception of sugar, nicotine, and caffeine. I don't know why those 3 were exempted, but they were. And we are not discussing them. But I feel I have to tell you that I'm a drug addict. This is a young people's convention. It's not okay for me to use chemicals. I wait to identify later in my story out of respect really for Bill Wilson, who didn't mention drugs until page 7. And didn't mention them again until page 9. So I took whatever pills I could get my hands on. I drank as much as I could. I just needed to not feel the way I felt. I drank to alleviate fear. And with that drinking created a loss of control, which created more fear, which created the need to take another drink to alleviate the fear, which created a greater loss of control, which created more fear. You see where this is going, right? I drank in a park mainly. I never had a legal drink. If I drank here, I woke up here. Pretty much just trace back to my feet, stand me up, and that's where I'd been drinking. But my friend Lizanne, she'd wake up. We drank in the suburbs of Philadelphia in a park, and Lizanne would wake up in New York City or Atlantic City. She got movement on her drinking, and I respected that. We'd all be watching Lizanne, and suddenly someone would say, "Damn, she's gone!" And we'd have to wait to find out. Now, we were kids, and Lizanne was funny. I don't want to think about the horrors that could have and probably were part of a 15, 16-year-old girl's life who's traveling the Northeast on buses and hitchhiking and blackouts. It was cute. It was fun then. But I have to see, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, my heroes were Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, dead guys. Everybody was dead. I didn't have the slightest bit of respect for a living human being. But I loved dead guys. That has changed. The people that I respect and that I love and that I emulate today are alive. They're living their lives. They're enmeshed in life. And alcoholism can take that all away. I'm back in the States, and my iPhone, there's an alarm that it was set. It says, at 8:45, it says, call Rick Slater. And then at 9, it reminds me again to call Rick Slater. Rick Slater's a guy that helped me get sober. He was sober a couple years longer than me. He was about 10 years older than me. When I got sober at 16, there were 2 girls with 5 years that were 21, but quite frankly, at 16, 21 was pretty old. And then there was a couple of guys that were 28 that had 10, they didn't have 10 years, they were 10 years older than me. They had a couple of years longer than me, and Rick was one of them. And he was incredibly instrumental in my early sobriety. And I don't know, about 10 years ago, Rick suffered also, and much more in later years, from depression and mania, and started drinking again, which I'm sure only complicated that. And last August, in what I imagine to be the pit of I don't know what, Rick sat in his car on the Haverford College campus, doused himself in gasoline, and lit himself on fire. How bad do you have to feel about yourself to light yourself on fire? And that's where he was. So I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 16 years old. And Lizanne, what happened was Lizanne had gotten sober. Lizanne had cursed at her mother one night, and that was too much. Who knew? I've been cursing at my mother for years. And Lizanne got sober, and she came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I noticed a change in her eyes. And 3 or 4 months later, I had a hit-and-run accident with a Catholic priest. I went to school the next morning. He found me, and he asked me to walk home, and I continued driving to where I was going, which was where my friends were. Our high school hockey team was undefeated the entire 4 years. It was great to go to the games because you knew we were going to win. It was like guaranteed. We'd go to the games, and we'd cheer for the team, and we'd scream at the other guys. And I showed up with this crashed-up car, and they wouldn't let me drive home. And that was different. No one had ever done that to me. I'd never seen that done to anyone else. We drove drunk all the time. This was before the days of friends don't let friends drive drunk. This was back in the days of friends go out driving drunk with friends. Right? Sometimes we'd walk to the party and go get the car later. You know, before I forget, and I know I'm going to be all over the place because, as I said, I'm out of practice at this, but I want to thank the host committee. You guys have done an amazing job. Really, it's been a gorgeous. I get nervous at young people's, conventions because I get nervous because we have a tendency to misbehave. We have a tendency to not put our best foot forward. I've been in young people's events, and now granted it's been a long time, but I've been at events where they're making announcements on Sunday morning like, if you destroyed your room, there will be a $250 charge. That would be rooms 100, 101, 106, 100, and, because we're like, I'm sober, man. Right? I remember when they outlawed smoking in California and we had a group conscience as to whether or not we're going to stop smoking in the meeting. It's the law. But we're autonomous, someone said. I'm so grateful to the host committee for extending this invitation for me to be here and for bringing me in from Israel. It's really, they got snookered a little because I was living on 87th Street when they asked. But I told them, I said, look, I'll come in, but it won't be from 87th Street. It'll be from slightly east. And I said I'd be glad to speak, but I can't speak on Shabbos. No, I was killing myself last night when the meeting started so long after Shabbos ended. And I wanted to say, Lizzie, you want to speak Sunday morning? You look really spiritual. But because I wanted to speak in ICYPAA since 5 seconds after I found out that ICYPAA existed. I mean, first of all, I love conventions, and you know, Lizzie talked about it last night, right? The danger is that, you know, we're all fired up, and in 2 hours we're going to be alone going, what do I do now, man? And we're going to have to breathe, and we're going to have to go back to our lives, and we're going to have to do the real work of our life. This is just like, this is a recharge. This is a special day in the calendar. This is a Shabbos for us, right? It's like a spiritual replenishment. A day, a weekend of rest, but rest in the most profound way, right? Was this restful? No. Was I replenished? Yes. Right? That's the thing with spiritual replenishment. It takes a lot of work, right? I got sold on this idea when I converted to Judaism of Shabbat as a day of rest. Baloney! 3 meals with friends, lots of people, 4 extra hours in synagogue. It's not a day of rest. You're exhausted. But you're recharged. So I came to Alcoholics Anonymous because Lizanne came to Alcoholics Anonymous the day after I had this car accident. I woke up, I got on the bus, I didn't smoke dope on the bus. We smoked pot on the way every day to school because it made us smarter. I didn't smoke that day because I was feeling kind of ill from the car accident and the drinking the night before, the Quaaludes, all of that was still in my system kind of churning. I'd hit this Catholic priest, which seemed like a big deal, at least between the spheres. Right? Like I hit a made man. And when he heard, he was not going to be happy. And, quite frankly, Marlon Brando was God. God was Marlon Brando in those days, sitting at a table going, oh, come to me with these petty sins. And there I was, right? And so I didn't get high that morning because I'd seen Joe Doherty. I felt sick. I felt like I'd throw up, and I'd seen Joe Doherty throw up on a bus. You don't want to throw up on a bus because instinctually you put your hands up because you're on a bus. But physics takes over at that point, and it redirects it right back at you. And I'd seen that happen, so I didn't and I got to school, and I threw up in the hallway, which is not allowed in the Catholic boys' school. And I was leaving the school, and I saw my friend Jimmy, and I said, Jimmy, I got anything you got I need, because my resolve is gone. 45 minutes before, I was not going to get high all day today, which for me is a long time. And in 45 minutes, throwing up in the hallway, I'm done. I want to get high. And Jimmy said, I just have a little, and I need it for me. Now that, to me, was an example of lower companionship. Is that not the heart of selfish, self-centered behavior? I was clearly ill and in need of medicinal marijuana. And he was a selfish man that kept it for himself. And I held that resentment for many years, and I wrote about it, and 10 or so years later at our 10th reunion, I saw Jimmy, and he remembered that day too. And he marks that to be the beginning of my sobriety. He said to me, imagine if I had given you that. What? You may not have gotten sober. Who knows? Because we can't predict what happens when we introduce drugs and alcohol into our system. We just can't. We do not have that. And so I went home and I slept for a little while, and then I called Alcoholics Anonymous because Lizanne was in Alcoholics Anonymous, and the woman answered the phone. She said, Alcoholics Anonymous, may we help you? I said, yeah, how do you get into AA? And she said, the door. And I thought, I don't know who this woman is, but I don't know why she's answering the phones. We don't need this kind of attitude from our outreach workers. She said, if you get here quickly, you can come to a board meeting. That's what I thought she said. I thought, a board meeting? I'm not even a member yet. What kind of shoddy organization are these people running? She said, be here by 12:30. That's when the board meeting starts. I got there around 2:30. Little place called the 319 Clubhouse. Wow. It's not there anymore, but I want to describe this room to you because there is a pamphlet, How to Decorate AA Rooms. It's not widely circulated. You will not find it on the literature table. But it was an upstairs room. It was a long room, and on the wall, halfway down the wall, a paneled wall, there were the slogans at odd angles down the wall. Easy does it. First things first. Live and let live. Think, think, think. Upside down. Ooh. And on window shades. That's what those things are that we usually put the steps and the traditions are. Those are window shades. If you pull the string, they will roll up like a window shade. I love that. I belong to an organization that put its two most important documents on window shades. Find me a church or synagogue that ever put the Ten Commandments on a window shade. The halls of government, that's the Bill of Rights. Whoop, gone. And then in the back of the room, the green Gothic backlit lettering, it says, but for the grace of God. And I thought, but for the grace of God, what? I would have gotten hit by a bus on my way in here. I mean, there were 3 guys in the room that morning when I got there. They were the 350-year-old Russian guys from those old, you're not going to remember this. Paulie and Tommy will remember this. Jeffrey, maybe. The 350-year-old Russian guys from the Dannon yogurt commercials. There were these old guys, they could barely move. And then they'd eat Dannon yogurt and they'd do backflips and cartwheels. Those 3 guys were in AA when I got here. And I thought, if I stay sober as long as they've been alive, I won't have a drink for 134 years. And I stayed there that day, and a lot of people gave me numbers, because that's what we do. A lot of people had cards printed with their names and their numbers on them. Some people went so far as to write call anytime. They underline it. They put an exclamation point. I do that. I do that because for a couple of reasons. I do it because I want to give what was given so freely given to me. I want to give that back. I owe that. I owe Alcoholics Anonymous. I owe the newcomer. And the second reason I do it is because I know they're never going to call. Now, I realize it's a little different now because we all carry our telephones around with us, but when I got sober, kid, we didn't have any cell phones. We had landlines. Unless you wanted to put the whole house in your pocket, you couldn't take a phone with you. That's the way it was when I got sober. We didn't have coffee. We put the grounds in our mouth and we drank hot water. Yes, we did. That way you don't, until we realized we were depriving the newcomer of cleaning our cups. That's why we started brewing the coffee when I got sober. But we didn't have our phones. They're never going to call. If they call, they're going to call when they think you're not there, 2 in the afternoon, 8 in the evening. I'm not going to call you. That's why I drank. So I wouldn't have to call you in the middle of the night and say, what? I'm the lowest piece of, I'm a horrible human being. I have no integrity. I have nothing. I'm a waste. That's why I drank, so I wouldn't have to call you in the middle of the night. One guy took my number. That night I stayed in the club and I went to a meeting there, and the next night, in the middle of the afternoon, he called me. He said, "Hi, this is Paul. We met in AA yesterday." I said, "Hi, Paul. How are you?" He said, "Good." He said, "I'm going to a meeting tonight. Would you like to go?" I said, "Yeah." I didn't want to go to a meeting. I want to say, "Paul, I went to AA yesterday." You mean I got to go 2 days in a row? But I said yes because that's what I say. If 6 people had called, I would have said yes to every single one of them. And he picked me up and he brought me to the Paoli Young People's Group. And I got alcoholism in that meeting. I went into that meeting. We sat down, and they went around the room, and everyone said their name and that they were an alcoholic. And as I remember it, I don't know if it's true, I was the last person in the room, and Paul was the second to last person in the room. And Paul just said, "My name is Paul." And I said, "My name is Chris." And in the midst of that meeting, in the next hour, I got alcoholism. Because you said you had alcoholism, and then you described your emotional lives, how you felt, how you responded to life. And based on that, I realized I had alcoholism too. No, go ahead, answer. We're not that busy. No, it's fine. I'm so self-centered you couldn't possibly knock me off topic. That's what I wanted to tell you earlier. You know you're old when the guy you know longest and best in the room is the archivist. Basically, I know no one here, and then Tommy walks in. I'm like, "Tommy, how are you?" And then immediately we're like, "Back when we were involved, they didn't do this, and they didn't do that. Where's the banquet? Can't stay sober without a banquet." I've been to 5 or 6 ICYPAAs. Put in a token bid in Cincinnati, went back to Florida, built a bid committee, went back to Chicago, didn't get the conference. And at that point decided I was going to move back to Philadelphia and continue to pursue, or start to pursue, a career. And I left, and they got the conference the next year, and Miami hosted in '86. And no, I tell you that because I want you to think I've been involved in AA for a long time. No, but back then the advisory council used to decide in private, and I used to say, that's wrong, that should be open, it should be be able to hear the discussion. So yesterday I got to hear the discussion. That was right. Should not have to listen to that discussion. Right? It's hard watching someone do God's will. It's even harder watching someone and they think they're doing God's will. No, look, this conference is healthy and strong. And they've been here and I haven't. So don't depend on me for this, but I'm going to grumble. So Paul took me to that meeting and he became my sponsor. And for a long time I called him every day. And by a long time I mean several months. And at the end of our conversations he would say, "Don't drink and go to meetings." And I would think, man, I am so lucky. I got the one brilliant guy in AA. He's so smart. He's so spiritual. He's so profound. Every day he knows exactly what to say to me. And clearly there are some duds here. I mean, we all know that. But I got the one. And then one day he said, "Don't drink, go to meetings and pray." And I stopped calling. I stayed in Alcoholics Anonymous and I graduated from high school and I moved down to Florida. Figured I would take my retirement first. And I fell in there with a group of people that were out of the Pompano workshop group. I was a member of the Fort Lauderdale Young People's Group and the Express Group. Met Paul E. there. And we were lucky enough to reconnect this past year. But I fell in with the guy, and I got a sponsor. I got a sponsor because I thought he had 25 years. Turned out he had 5 more than me, but he was a Baptist turned Catholic. Talk about rigid. We were all members of this, it's called the Pompano Beach Workshop Group. It was a big book group. It was essentially run by a man named Wesley Parrish, who, these guys were like Southern, and I was Northern, and John was from North Carolina, and he used to say, there was this woman I was in love with, this girl named Lori, and she couldn't stay clean and sober, but although I knew no human power could have relieved my alcoholism, I was fairly convinced there was a human power that could have relieved her alcoholism, and that I was it. And I'd say, John, can I date Lori? And he'd say, sure. Really? If you can handle the responsibility of killing her. It took some of the fun out of it for me. But we went through the steps, and we worked the steps out of the book as it was directed. I'd done a fourth step. I visited Florida 6 months before, and there was this charismatic guy that ran a little storefront mission. He was a Lutheran minister, but he'd played piano in a whorehouse in Alaska or something like that, and he was like really cool. And he told me to write a fourth step, and I was there for Christmas vacation. And I wrote a fourth step, and best as I could in 2 days. And he said, look, I'm busy, but read one example from each section. And it wasn't thorough, and it certainly wasn't fearless, and it wasn't a complete sharing, and there wasn't much effect. But I came back that next year, and we were going through the book in the group, and John took me through the book. Went to the Florida State Convention. I got involved in the Florida State Convention, and we took it the next year. I walked in the Breakers in Palm Beach, Florida, this gigantic hotel. And I was in the coffee room, and a man was coming across the room, and he had a tag on, and he was looking at me, and I started out the door because I knew he was going to say, you know what, leave. I was coming from my job. I was cutting grass at the Yellowbird Motel, and I was green and covered with grass, and I just knew he was going to throw me out because this was a beautiful hotel. And he caught me on the way to the door, and he said, welcome. And we got involved, and the next year we brought the conference, the Florida State Conference, to the Boca Raton Beach, Hotel and Beach Club, whatever it's called. And I met one of the speakers there, a guy named Tom, and Tom was sober a long time. He was a veterinarian, and he gave a great talk, and he was an amazing man. And I was sober longer than he was. He was 28, or he was 32 and 12 years sober, but I was only 19 and 3 years sober. But you understand the math there, right? Sure, he had 10 more years than me, but when I'm 32, I'll be 16, and he's only 13. Therefore, I'm sober longer than he is. This works with almost everyone, and the people that got sober earlier than me aren't alcoholic. And in a matter of minutes, Tom asked me what step I was working on. In those days, I was preparing to do 2 and getting ready to do 3 and possibly getting ready to turn my will and my love, as I did a little extra preparation and writing on that topic. And in a matter of minutes, he's calling me teen dream and heartbreaker and asshole. How did he know? At the end of that weekend, I was on my knees with Tom saying the 3rd step prayer. And I went to John, and John said, well, let's start writing a 4th step. And I said, great, which one should we do? Because, Hazelton had a guide, and NA at the time was writing their literature. They had like a 40-page guide with a whole section on bestiality. They would write literature and pass it around, and then like a memo went out. Don't read that thing, man. It's dangerous. John said, the big book. And I said, what, that big book? What are they talking about? Mr. Brown. His attentions to my wife? And then he said there's a 4th column. I looked clearly at the picture. There's only 3 columns. It's right here. 3 columns. 4th column. The speaker has now moved his hand up and down the side of the book showing that there is no fourth column in the book. And I wrote out my fourth step, and when I figure we're in Florida, man, let's use the Everglades. We've got the Everglades here. Because I was going to burn my fourth step. I'd heard people burn their fourth steps. I figure we got the Everglades, we'll get robes, like Obi-Wan Kenobi. We'll go out to the Everglades, we'll start a small fire. It has to be a small fire because when I throw on the pages, it will become a large fire, indicating the connection to heaven and earth. And I'll chant my resentments. I won't just read them. I resent my mother. John picks me up in his Camaro and he says, "Oh, you can start reading now." In your Camaro? And then he says, well, you know what? We went to a park. Unfortunately, it was at the end of runway number 3 at Fort Lauderdale International Airport. So every 5 minutes he couldn't hear me anyway. Which is when you work in the. And then there was a dog. Then he looks at his watch and says, let's get some food. Why not do some volunteer work while we're at it? I mean, we go to WAGS. WAGS. Doesn't matter what WAGS is. It's called WAGS. W-A-G-S. Is that a place to read the greatest spiritual treatise of the late 20th century? Oh, bring it in, of course, bring it in. And then he's waving people over the table. Hey, Eddie, come on over. How are you? You don't have to read while you're ordering. Thanks, John. Like the salad with the blue cheese dressing, and I resent my father for the fact that he's never been present in my life. Then we start reading some more in the car, and then we go to a meeting. Why not, again? We finish up late that night in the driveway of the apartment that I hadn't had when I started writing. And he said, go inside and sit quietly for an hour, and if there's anything forgotten, call me up. And I sat quietly, and I did. And he said, say the 7-step prayer. I don't know if I was entirely willing, but I was more willing than I had ever been. I was as close to as entirely willing as I had ever been. And so I continued through the steps. Not out of any great love for God or the steps or Alcoholics Anonymous even, but because I was afraid of John. We arranged to do some amends while I was back in Philadelphia that Christmas for vacation, and I went. I had my first job sober was as a petroleum exchange engineer. I pumped gas at the Exxon station, and we used to steal a little bit of gas. There was a way to turn the pump off without actually turning it off. So if you bought $2 worth of gas, I could turn the pump off but not actually turn it off, and then when the next person came in, I would turn it on. And it would start at $2. So the first $2 were mine, and all the rest was the boss's. And he didn't keep very good inventory of the oil, so we would sell the oil and not report it. And the guy that worked in the morning, his name was John. He'd been there about 112 years. He was in that Dannon yogurt commercial. And no one would ever mistrust him, so we would short his box in the morning so that his cash was a couple of dollars short, and we'd buy dinner. And so I owed John. I owed Lou, the owner of the store, the owner of the gas station. I don't know. We decided on, I think, $1,500 or $1,000. It was $1 million to me. And I'm in Florida, and we decide this is one of the amends I'm going to make. And I go up to Philadelphia, and I'm not in Florida anymore, so it's sleety and rainy and cold December night. Go into the station, say hi to the mechanics. I say, is Lou here? They point out to the island. He's pumping the gas. Lou Batista. I don't know if he was in the mafia. But he thought he was in the mafia. And it's not good when Lou is pumping gas. So he comes in and he shakes off his coat and he goes, why is it always the young ones? Why doesn't some old guy? Why is it always the old guy? Why doesn't some young punk mouth off to me? I will hit him so hard. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to make the amends today. Clearly, Lou is not in a spiritual place of reception. And I wasn't going to make the amends. Believe me, with my whole heart, I was not going to make the amends. And then I thought about John, my sponsor. And it wasn't going to be cold and sleety in Florida when I got back. It was going to be warm. We would be sitting in short-sleeve shirts, and I would be trying to describe how cold and wet it was. And I knew I wouldn't fully be able to explain that. So I said to Luke, can I talk to you for a minute? We walked outside and we stood over the open hood, the open engine of a car. And I thought, I'm just going to close my eyes and start telling the story of what I have to do here. And when he hits me, I'll stop. Close my eyes and I say, Lou, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and when I worked for you, I used to steal from you, and these are the ways that I stole from you. I have no actual way of knowing. I'm still talking. No actual way of knowing how much money I stole from you, but I imagine it to be about $1,500. I don't have $1,500, but what I'd like to do is make payments. I can give you $20 now, and $20 a month for the rest of my life. And I'm still talking. And I open up my eyes, and Lou's looking at me. He says, I'm a member of GA. And I know what you're trying to do here. And I respect that. And what I'd like to do is, let's make that $500. And I thought to myself, wow, that's amazing. This is a miracle. This is a moment of spiritual connection. And then I thought, you know, as easy as you went to 500, you could have gone to 0. But I paid Lou. I paid him off, and I made the amends. And so I was sober, and I was sober a couple of years, and I stayed sober, and I'm running out of time. And there's so much to tell you about in my life. I was sober about. I left Florida after a few years, and I moved up to Philadelphia, and I took some acting classes, and then I moved to New York, and I was here in the late 80s, from 86 to 90, and I went to Circle in the Square Drama School right around the corner, and I wanted to be a famous actor, and that didn't happen. But I was here a few years, and I was sober, and I was involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, and all through the way, when I applied to Circle, pretty exclusive program at the time, 18 people got in, several hundred people applied. I sat in AA. The application was two sides of one piece of paper. And I sat in AA and I talked about that application and how should I write or should I print? Should I use black ink? Should I use blue ink? What order should I put my references? And finally a woman came up to me and she said, this is a stamp. It is to mail your application to drama school. Should you choose not to use this stamp, stop talking about applying to drama school. Which seemed like the time to mail in the application. And I applied there, and I got in there, and I went to school there for a couple of years, and then I went out to L.A., and it was when I was in L.A., I'm not the greatest member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm really not. I tend to have a commitment, but I'm not great at my commitments. I've messed them up. I don't have a stellar track record. I have not done my job in AA. And that's not what we're shooting for. But it's no reason to leave. Just get another job. Do better next time. And so I've had sponsors, and I have sponsors, but I was yearning and I was seeking. When I was 18 years old, when I was still living in Florida, I met a beautiful young woman named Laura Levinson of blessed memory. Laura died of she contracted HIV. This was before there was HIV. I mean, before we had a name for it. When Laura and I went out for a short time, and then I needed space, I needed time, I needed to think, I needed a little room, and she met a guy named Rick who didn't need time or space or was afraid of commitment, and they entered into a relationship for a number of years. And Rick had shot dope in the 70s. And one day Rick got sick, and then it turned out that Laura was sick too, and Laura lived for about, I don't know, another 10 or 12 years. And she was a beautiful, beautiful woman who died far too young from that horrible disease. And but when we were dating, probably when she was still trying to impress me, she gave me the book Exodus, Leon Uris's Exodus. It's a historical fiction. You know, the events are true, the people are false. You know, people write these things all the time. I read that book, and I fell in love with Israel and with the culture of the Jews and the people, the Jewish women. And it was just there. It was just there in my mind. And as I said later on, I read Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi, and these stories spoke to me. It doesn't matter particularly. I mean, this is my particular story, as the book said. But I was 10, 12 years sober, and I needed more. My first higher power was me and Paul. Added Paul to me was a power greater than me. I got that. But at 10, 12 years sober, I needed more. And this was in the 90s. This was L.A. People were making up religions. They're like, you know, I've got a Buddhist prayer altar, but Buddha doesn't really speak to me, so I've got Jesus iconography on the Buddhist prayer altar, and I've got some crystals because I like their color. And like, wow, who does that? Me. Okay. The book says that's fine. The book says the newcomer, he can believe in anything he wants as long as it makes sense to him. But I was searching and I was seeking, and nothing made sense to me. And I had these books that I'd read and these people, but you don't join religions. You can't join religions. And then I took a class to get Judaism out of my head because I was so infatuated with these Jewish things. I was clearly blocking myself from my true spiritual path. And I fell in love. And I converted to Judaism, and the Jews are crazy, so a couple years later I had to convert again. And they're really crazy, so a few years later I had to convert again. So I've converted to 3 religions in my life, all the same religion. And I wanted to learn Hebrew, you know, because the mode of spiritual expression, the way to be in communication with God in Judaism is largely through learning, through looking at a text and seeing what that text says. And we know that, right? We read the book. I've read the book. You know how many times I've read this book? Over and over. And it changes. When I first read the book, I was so grateful that it was about alcohol. Just about alcohol. It's not about God. 3 or 4 years later, I read the book again. I was like, thank God it's about God and not just about alcohol. Because those newcomers, if any of the other ones are here besides Katie, not drinking is crucial to sobriety. It is absolutely crucial to not drink if you want to remain sober. But we're good at not drinking for a day. We're here to stay stopped. And that's where we need a sponsor, and we need a spiritual program of action. That's where we need to develop a relationship with God. And so I wanted to go to Israel, and I went to Israel, and I met the woman who's now my wife. In between there, when I first converted, I married a Muslim. How's that for? Yeah, I converted in so I could marry out. Her father said, if you convert to Islam, I'll come to the wedding. But we divorced. I found out you can divorce in Alcoholics Anonymous and stay sober. You know, because sometimes you hear these people stand at the podium or stand in the meeting or sit in the meeting and they just stopped drinking and they suddenly went to college. They could not read. And suddenly they're doctors. They couldn't be capable of saying hello to someone and suddenly they're married. So I want you to know I've been fired. I've been divorced. And I'm still sober. It's painful. I'm not suggesting it. I'm not saying get fired, man. You'll love it. Oh, get divorced. That breakup is so, see that look of hatred in those eyes. There's nothing like it. No, but I knew a girl, Lonnie, she used to say that she thought in AA it was don't drink and win prizes. So I moved to Israel 10 years ago to pursue Hebrew. I wanted to learn Hebrew. And I met a woman who was my teacher in the school that I went to, and we got married. And we have these 4 beautiful children. We have 2 6-year-olds, we have twins, and we have a 4-year-old and a 7-month-old. And I need you to understand, I'm an alcoholic. It wasn't simple. It wasn't. We tried to get pregnant. You know, we couldn't get pregnant. We go, of course, I blamed her. She doesn't have a problem. I have a problem. Turns out there's no sperm in my semen. Isn't that something I would have wanted to know at 16, 17, 18 years old? Do you know the number of times I thought God was going to punish me by making her pregnant, whoever she was? I'm just saying, stay out of your mind. You're probably wrong. And so we did what was necessary, which was painful in itself. I'm just going to say the name. Testicular biopsy. Doesn't that sound painful? Should my wife ask, I did not talk about this from the podium. But we're friends, we're family, in fact. If I can't tell you guys, who can I tell? I didn't feel good about that. I didn't go, oh yeah, another success. I'm infertile, yeah. I'm a loser, I'm illiterate, and I'm infertile. All right, way to go. But you show up, and this doctor says go to that doctor, and that doctor says go to this doctor. Take this, shoot this, bang this, bang, and you're done. And you sit in the house with these 4 beautiful children, and you think, not in a million years I shouldn't have this blessing. In a million years. If I had been given beyond my wildest dreams when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I would have a lifetime supply of Marlboro and a Camaro. I don't smoke, and it would be a 1980 Camaro. And I don't take care of my toys very well, so it wouldn't be like all tricked out and antique now. I had a car that you had to hold the battery up with a board so it didn't fall into the street. And I drove that car for several years that way because that worked if you didn't go too fast or stop too quickly. And so I don't shoot. What time? Way over, almost, yeah? Way 100 minutes over. I couldn't be happier or more honored to be here, and yet yesterday, my 6-year-olds are starting 1st grade, and in synagogue yesterday morning, they had a Kita Aleph, a 1st grade ceremony that included my children, which I've missed. And it's not yay or nay. It's that things that we do in our lives have cost. And that's the cost of this event. It's a cost I was willing to pay. Of course, I'm here. And you could argue that I should pay it, and that I I deserve to pay that cost because I owe you. I owe Alcoholics Anonymous, and I always will. But it's a cost. That's sobriety. That's life now. It's not magic. It's not, oh, wow, and then I was, no. I do this, and this is the result, and this is the cost, and this is, and we go on. You know? And that's what sobriety's been. I want to finish by reading one final thing, and then I promise I'll stop. The long form of the 12th tradition reads, and finally, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the principle of anonymity has an immense spiritual significance. It reminds us that we are to place principles before personalities, that we are actually to practice a genuine humility. This to the end that our great blessings may never spoil us, and that we shall forever live in thankful contemplation of Him who presides over us all. Sometimes I get caught up in should we move the meeting, should we not move the meeting? Doesn't that person speak all the time? Can we finally get some good coffee? They said they were going to clear the seats at 7:30. They did not. Not Friday night at least. So I got, But I got to remember that the fact that we're sitting here and the fact that we're sitting here together is a miracle. That each of us is sober is a miracle. That each of us can sit next to the person we're sitting next to is a miracle. And I forget that. I forget that in my relationship. I spent this amazing weekend here, and I almost called my wife this morning and say, honey, can you call the hemorrhoid doctor? What? You just spent 4 tremendous spiritual days and living in this amazing time, and you're going to delegate mundane tasks? Of course that's why your relationship is difficult. That's why you have sponsees. But I have to remember that this is a miracle, and I have to live in this miracle with each breath. And I have to remember that that's true in all my life, not just inside these rooms, even more so outside of these rooms. That I've learned to live with you after 30 years of practice in this room, that's a given. But that I can behave myself as a sober, mature adult out there, that's the challenge. I lost my father last year, and that was difficult. And I had this little show that I wrote run off Broadway for 8 months, and that was tremendous. That's life. My dream came true. Just took 25 years. And my father died 2 weeks before it happened. But that's life. And I wouldn't miss a moment of it. And without you, I would have missed it all. Thank you.